Well, hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Building and Growing Apprenticeship with Equity in Mind, introducing the Equitable Apprenticeship Toolkit. Our webinar today is generously sponsored by Burlington English, and today we have Robert Breitbart with us, who's going to say a few words. Robert, good to see you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bonney, and to everybody out there. Very, very much looking forward to seeing you all in Atlanta in about a month and a half. We're going to have a great presence from Burlington English, so please reach out. Let me know if you're heading that way. robert.b@burlingtonenglish.com. And I love this topic. I think it's just a fantastic topic. I love the resources our presenters are going to share today. And with Burlington English, we like to say we get our ESL learners thinking about what you're going to be seeing today the minute they step through your door as a brand new registrant. And so with Burlington English, as you know, if you're familiar with us, we have Burlington Core, and really our core textbook, if you will, digital. And, we get students thinking about, what's their next steps beyond just learning English, but actually, getting their career going in the US and taking it to the next level. And so even at the core level, we start talking about that and give all the resources for teachers to start talking about it with students as well. And to make sure that students have the right amount of robust, college and career readiness standards and the English for language proficiency standards, we make sure that all of our products, but especially core, laying the foundation for students to be ready for their next steps beyond ESL with ABE, HSE, and getting involved in career study. Then past Burlington Core, we have our career exploration and soft skills. I like to call it like a virtual career counselor that they're meeting with. And so in career exploration and soft skills, well, teachers are able to help our students understand that we're there for them, not just at the beginning of their journey of learning English, but for multiple steps in their career pathway, and just what a career pathway is. And in fact, at all three levels, beginning, intermediate, and advanced, they actually do mock interviews, if you will, and meet with a virtual career counselor as part of this career exploration and soft skills. And of course, they start looking through those and exploring and getting more familiar and understanding the 16 Department of Labor career clusters, that there's such things as career ladders. And again, we give give teachers everything they need to do, again, more than just standard adult ESL. And then lastly, we really want to get students ready to enter into, career study, whether it be the trades or anything else. We really want them to have a leg up, even though English is their new language. So we have our English for specific careers, and I like to call these kind of like a mock, career shadowing. So if you can't bring your learners, on site to workplaces, virtually bring the workplaces to them. And so with English for specific careers, they actually learn career specific dialogues and career specific vocabulary that, again, is going to get them ready to once again have a leg up when they actually enter into career study. And as you can see on the screen, so many times our students will be familiar in their native language with the career specific vocabulary and dialogues they're about to encounter. So we make sure that they know that in English and they're really ready to hit the ground running for career study. And lastly, they put this all together in a digital portfolio. And so all of their work that they're doing with you, they have access to at any time. And again, they're really ready to enter into things like pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship, like you're going to be hearing about. We'd love to tell you more, so look for us at www.burlingtonenglish.com. And with that, I'll turn it over to our great presenters and to Mr. Bonney. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, Robert. Thank you, Burlington English, for sponsoring today's webinar. We are grateful for your friendship, partnership, and everything you do in the field of adult education. So thank you.
Thank you, friends.
All right, our presenters today are Peter Simon and Jennie Mollica. Peter brings to his work with High Road Alliance many years of experience as a community college career and technical education administrator who has supported the building of innovative workforce development partnerships. He has provided leadership to pioneer efforts in several sectors to link labor management collaboration with college programs, adult education providers, workforce boards, and community organizations. His work has consistently focused on creating training and employment opportunities for those who have historically been underserved. Jennie has over 20 years of practitioner and leadership experience in the fields of workforce development, adult education, and community development, particularly in the development of career education programs that are equitably accessible to working learners with barriers such as limited English or basic skills. Please let us know where you're calling in from today in the chat box, and you can submit questions in the Q&A box or the chat box, I think, during their presentation. They'll let you know the specifics. And with that, I'll turn it over to our presenters. Thank you so much.
Thank you, James.
Thanks, James.
Just get our presentation up here.
Yep.
As Jennie's opening this up, thank you all for being here. We're really excited to spend a little time with you. Again, the title of this is Building and Growing Apprenticeships with Equity in Mind. And the subtitle is Introducing the Equitable Apprenticeship Toolkit. I just want to say, some of you may have been at the COABE conference in Seattle last spring, and we were just rolling this out then. And so even if you've heard that presentation, what we're going to talk about a lot today is how we've gone further down the road of hooking up adult education and apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship. Jennie, do you want to say a little word about High Road Alliance?
Yeah, we want to, oops, I'm skipping ahead here too fast. I think we wanted to just very briefly tell you a tiny bit about our backgrounds. We're both really excited to be here and share with you this passion we have for apprenticeship. For me, it grew out of being an English as a second language teacher, working for many years in immigrant and refugee services in California, then sort of moving into workforce development services, then partnering more with community colleges and adult education providers. And Peter and I formed this organization about 2.5 years ago with a real focus on helping to shape and grow equitable career pathway training programs. With that, we have really developed further our interest in apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships as a really strong model of career pathways. So we're delighted to be able to share with you all today some of our interest in this. did you want to say a little about your background, Peter?
Sure. Well, and I had that great introduction before, but just to note, besides having been a community college CTE dean for a number of years, I actually started out my educational career as a GED teacher in Alameda, California. But for many years before that, I was a journeyman and apprentice carpenter in the Carpenters Union. So I've kind of seen the apprenticeship world from both sides. I'll just leave it at that. But we're really excited about this work.
I'm starting to see some activity in the chat and in the Q&A. Just want to let you know to keep those thoughts coming, share questions as we go along, and to respond to a few I see. Yes, these slides will be shared. COABE will do a good job of that.
Yep.
They'll be available to you as soon as the presentation is over.
Yep. So real quickly, what we're hoping to do is we are going to introduce this toolkit that we've developed, and specifically how it can be used. And I want to emphasize by teams of people developing these programs. And really kind of core to today's presentation is talking to you, an audience of people involved with adult education, how you can be involved with these apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs, particularly with a lens for an equitable approach. We're going to give some concrete examples of how this work has been done using the toolkit. And we really want to make sure to have time to deal with hopefully a number of questions that this presentation generates. Next.
It's a lot to fit into our hour, but we're going to do our best. So here is a link to the Equitable Apprenticeship Toolkit, which is available to all. It's a resource intended to be used widely. It was developed a partnership that we formed with Grow Apprenticeship California, which is an entity that is supporting the California Apprenticeship Initiative, part of California's statewide effort to grow apprenticeships hugely over the next few years, initially by investing in community college training programs. We're interested in that extending to adult education partnerships. So we, of course, created this resource with that in mind. It was funded by the James Irvine Foundation and is now up on the website of Grow Apprenticeship California as well as ours. So this link there it is in the chat. So you can open that up yourselves. And we're going to sort of take you on a quick tour of it today to make sure you understand how it's organized and how you might use it in your context.
Importantly, as part of this toolkit, and I just want to say that we developed this, Jennie and I were the authors of this toolkit, but in putting it together, it grew out of a number of focus groups, peer learning circles, talking to dozens of people out in the field, both in the labor movement, educators, disability folks, a whole bunch of folks. And we came up with this sort of organizing framework, which is at the beginning of the toolkit. And I don't want to go on and on about it, but really what we want to stress is that we very purposely made it a circle, because what we found is it's really valuable, particularly in terms of equity, both for people starting out, teams of people starting out developing these programs, but also for people who've been doing this for some time, often to kind of check in and say, okay, our numbers don't look very good. What are we doing? What could we do differently? So it's for them. And also, so it's a continuous improvement model. And also just to say, excuse me, lots of times when people use the word equity, they really just focus on the access and recruitment piece, which is important. But also what we found is the issues around equity and recruiting and keeping people of color and women in apprenticeship programs is really important at all stages of this, a pre-apprenticeship, notably when people transition from pre-apprenticeship to apprenticeship, a lot of people drop off at that point, and making apprenticeship programs themselves accessible and supportive to a very diverse population of people. Anywho, next slide.
That's a good overview of the framework, which you can kind of keep in mind as we move through the whole toolkit. And I think part of what Peter's describing there is something we describe early in the toolkit, is the value of applying this equity lens to look at every aspect of how an apprenticeship program comes together and how it grows and the elements of it. So the toolkit itself is meant to help teams to apply this lens to every aspect of their work, emphasizing that it's not a one-time activity. Here you see again the emphasis on it being a team. I think often when we work with adult education partners, there's a sense that, well, we can't develop an apprenticeship on our own. This seems like a daunting task. And of course it is, because developing an apprenticeship is not an individual endeavor. You need to be partnered with employer, at least one employer, possibly a union partner, maybe community-based organizations. There are many partners who can be involved in an apprenticeship team, but our emphasis is that the adult education partner is a key member of that team when questions are coming up about equity, and the adult education partner has an important contribution to make on that team. So these tools are grouped in two areas. Some of them are about information gathering, really understanding your community, who might not be represented in these occupations or in this apprenticeship program. What are some of the barriers that they might face? And then action planning really draws from that information to say what actions can be taken to address those barriers. So there's the toolkit itself. There's a workbook with some sort of tables you can fill out if that's helpful for your team. And it's large. There are many pieces to it, many different tools. And we like to emphasize that you don't need to think of it as something you move through step by step. Depending on your situation, the point you're at in your process, you may just pick and choose a few of those tools as you go along.
Here's a quick overview, and I'm not going to read this list, but it gives you an idea of the 14 tools that are in the toolkit. We're going to show you briefly kind of how they're structured. But as Jennie said, they're divided into information gathering tools and action planning tools. And sort of writ large, the information gathering tools are about identifying who's out there in terms of demographics. Really importantly, a core element is identifying what are the obstacles people face to get into these different occupations, and also what resources and what are out there to identify interest and even public resources available to support them. And then the action planning tools are, as you can see on this list. And again, we really encourage you to just spend some time after this presentation sauntering through this toolkit, but they're really about what are you going to do about all that in terms of really identifying the barriers that were identified. How are you going to overcome them? And in our second part of this presentation, we're going to give you examples of how adult education folks have teamed up with these programs to do exactly that.
Yeah, thanks
Jennie.
for foreshadowing those examples, Peter. I think we think those are sort of maybe the interesting part of the applied part of this presentation. So
Yes.
stay tuned for those.
Yes.
So here we have the link again to our toolkit, and we're going to take you directly to this and spend just a few minutes browsing through this. It's going to be kind of a whirlwind tour. We hope not to make you dizzy as we fly through, but we thought it would be helpful just to give you a feel for what's in here and encourage you to click on the link and explore it further on your own. So of course we start with some kind of framing, ideas, definitions, the framework itself, some tips on using it with your team. And then you'll see here that much of the table of contents is these different tools. And I think what we decided would be helpful today is to show you in a little more depth the first of the information gathering tools about looking at community demographics. And then the fourth action tool is about designing a pre-apprenticeship program. And often in our work with adult educators, this comes up as a question: what can be our role in designing a pre-apprenticeship program? So we're going to give you a quick glance at these two tools. There's the framework. All right. Do you want to talk through the structure of this one,
Sure.
Peter?
Yeah, I think this is very much sort of a drive-by of the whole toolkit. But I think importantly to point out that we're humbled by the amount of information and the sort of variability of what teams need to do. So we actually, every tool starts out with not do this, but questions, things to consider. What do you need to be thinking about as you set foot on this terrain? As you can see here on the first one, which is just advice on how to figure out who is in your community. And every tool also to note, each tool starts out with a guiding question, just again to keep it focused. I just want to quickly say, we looked at many toolkits in developing this, and we found ourselves needing to come back to, let's make sure we stay in the equity lane on this toolkit, because there's myriad other toolkits and nuts and bolts of how to develop an apprenticeship and a pre-apprenticeship. And in fact, we have links to those toolkits in our toolkit. But each tool also has a section, as Jennie has on the screen here. It's called Key Equity Perspective. Why is it important that you do community demographics? Okay. And we give examples. And then if you keep scrolling, Jennie, for a second, we start getting every tool. And again, this was getting input from literally hundreds of people, is various really useful resources on how do you get this information. And you can see this here. And then each tool ends with a series of reflection questions. So again, the value of these tools, it's not like paint by numbers. It's more like helping a team of people who can take on this sort of somewhat overwhelming task to kind of pull it apart and deal with different pieces one or two at a time. That's our goal with this toolkit. And then, of course, each tool has a table at the end of it. And as Jennie mentioned, there's a companion workbook that we'll make sure you have access to that is in Word format, so you can change this and customize it. And it also makes it easy to fill it out.
All right.
And then we go
I'm
on
going to
to,
speed ahead. You're going
okay,
to get the drive-by view of all the
put
other
on
information
your
gathering
seatbelt for a
tools.
minute.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we head toward the action planning tools, which are structured similarly, but with a little bit of a different approach to organizing the way resources are shared. So you'll see a similar way of opening up the tool with a problem definition, a question for you to ask yourself. So in the case of pre-apprenticeship program, it's asking the team to think back to those inequities or barriers that were identified through information gathering, or that what are the barriers that you're trying to address, and how do those indicate a need for a pre-apprenticeship program. So this tool is designed to help you reflect on those barriers and what some solutions will be. Like Peter said, there are a lot of other resources out there that are general for building pre-apprenticeships and apprenticeships. We try to link to some of those. And like he said, to keep the emphasis here on applying that equity lens. So below the general resources, you find some things to consider, some ways to relate this back to some of the information you have about barriers, and some general tips about what to think about as embarking on doing work on a pre-apprenticeship. And then here's the way we organize resources. So if a barrier was identified related to potential apprentices' basic English or math skills, or whether they have a high school diploma, here are some things to think about. And you'll notice that some of these opportunities to address the inequalities and barriers are really opportunities to work with adult education partners. And we see that as an important message of this tool, in that, if you're identifying that English communication ability is a major barrier to participants entering your apprenticeship, and Peter and I will give an example of this shortly, then turn to your adult ed provider and talk to them about ESL, talk to them about integrated education and training, and start building these into your apprenticeship program. So this tool as well ends up with some good examples of strong pre-apprenticeship programs that are addressing equity, some reflection questions, and again, just a little table where your team can identify which of these opportunities could be a fit for your program and what actions might be taken. So I think with that, we're going to go back to the main presentation. And feel free to put questions in the chat or in the Q&A. We'll be addressing those shortly. What I'm going to do here, you'll notice when you receive the slides that we've put in some screenshots of these two tools. Those are kind of placeholders since we gave you the live action view.
Okay.
And now some examples.
Okay, well, very briefly, and I talk about this all the time, so I'm going to try and be crisp here. Our first example of working with adult education and a pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship program was with a program in Northern California, in Marin and Sonoma County, if those of you are familiar with California geography. Put simply, like most bus companies during the pandemic, they were incredibly shorthanded in terms of needing to figure out how they can recruit people from the community to become bus operators or bus drivers. So this was an incredible opportunity for us to work with a team of employers, a union, and in this case, it was the non-credit adult ed part of Santa Rosa Junior College in developing a pre-apprenticeship program to really recruit from the community and with a number of Spanish-speaking people or bilingual people to prepare them for the apprenticeship program that was also being developed. So again, we had a whole team, and over again, that as we went through this and actually wrote a grant that funded this project, people would remark and say things, there's no way we could have done this by ourselves. And the really cool thing is that we utilized the toolkit in developing this pre-apprenticeship. In fact, we specifically used the tool we just showed you, planning tool number 4. Without going into great detail, the team was able to really use that tool and some of the earlier information gathering tools to really outline what were the barriers to people from the community getting into their apprenticeship program. We had a very strong labor management partnership. And really, this was the first ever of its kind of pre-apprenticeship in this sector in the United States. Next slide. So in terms of access and recruitment, right up the bat, it was through our research and identifying the data that was gathered, it became clear that 60% of people from the community who took the test they normally give to get into the apprenticeship failed, and that a very large proportion of those people that failed were people of color. So we said, okay, what are we going to do? The agency, the transit agency said, okay, we're going to develop a pre-apprenticeship program with you where we're going to eliminate the test. We're going to design it so well that they're not going to even have to take the test. They go right into the apprenticeship. The adult school hired a full-time bilingual outreach specialist. All the publicity was in English and Spanish. And again, based on the need of the transit agency, they came up with a $1,000 incentive for people who completed the pre-apprenticeship program. And we decided to offer the classes all 2 nights a week online, so that people who are working already, a lot of them could be part of these classes. Next, please.
Peter, what I love about this example here is that it's clear that the employer was right there at the table considering this, like really thinking through how this could benefit them and what actions they could take. But it's also clear that the adult education partner was absolutely key to this access and recruitment strategy. It could not have happened without that partner involved. And I think that's one of our reasons for including this example.
Yeah, and thank you. I'm moving very quickly through this because we want to make sure to have time to just talk to you. I do want to point out that, again, this was not any kind of off the shelf. In fact, this adult school had never done been involved with the pre-apprenticeship program, nor did they know much at all about transit agency, bus driving, or mechanics jobs. So this curriculum was built completely collaboratively with the employers and the training department of the bus company, but also this labor management program had what were called peer mentors, which is experienced bus operators who supported new drivers in the agency. And those peer mentors became a core part of both the curriculum development team. And now that we're running the program, they're actually they're involved with the classes and on the on-site shadow days as well. The classes are taught bilingually, primarily in English, because you need to operate as a bus driver in English. So you need to be heading toward English, but there's bilingual support. And again, the course is completely designed as preparing people both for soft skills. The application is done. They don't even have to do an interview. The interview is done in the pre-apprenticeship in terms of having practicum classes, including riding along on a bus with the peer mentors, which of course the students loved.
And so clear here how that collaboration again with employers and workers made the adult school more effective or the community college, sorry, but the non-credit programs more effective in their role as educators because they were able to kind of bring the strengths of all the partners together.
I'll never forget one of the adult ed teachers writing me after one of those shadow days, wrote me a text message and said, I got to drive a bus, you know. Anyway, next slide, please.
Here it is.
Okay. So the thing also about, as we mentioned, a lot of people in a lot of pre-apprenticeship programs have the flaw of having a big gap between finishing the pre-apprenticeship program and actual employment and getting into the apprenticeship. So again, because of the collaboration between the adult education and the agency itself, they aligned offering the classes and the start of the next training cycle for new apprentices. So there was just a 2-week gap between finishing the pre-apprenticeship and the first cohort of pre-apprentices entering the apprenticeship program. So there was no break. In fact, it turns out in this case, it was over the Christmas holiday, so people aren't working anyway. Of course, bus companies never close, but also, again, the peer mentors and the outreach specialists provided that really incredible social support and keeping track of people as they made sure they met all the requirements, because they have to get a Department of Motor Vehicles thing, a physical, a drug test, all these applications done. They were there with them, including in a computer lab, helping them with this stuff, and to make sure nobody fell through the cracks. And finally, when pre-apprentices successfully were hired by the bus company, they got an additional $1,000 bonus from Golden Gate Transit. I just want to report that the first cohort has completed last fall, and they are now working as apprentice bus operators. And in a year, they'll be making $72,000 a year with benefits in a union job. The second cohort is underway, and they will be going to work this summer. So this, again, was this amazing learning by everybody. We're still learning adult ed and an apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship program. I'm sure you might have some questions about that. Jennie.
That was the last slide. Okay. Well, now we're going to take you to another example of some programs we're working on, a little more recent. So these are just now getting underway. But this effort is around improving equitable access to existing apprenticeship programs. So we were contacted by the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, IUPAT, which runs apprenticeships all across the United States and in Canada, and had identified that generally access of diverse community members to their apprenticeships is an issue and something they wanted to do better on. They reached out to us specifically recognizing that many of the interested and potentially highly qualified workers in their regions were English learners, and were either not approaching or not entering or not making it through their apprenticeship programs. So they asked us to start working with several of their individual district councils around the country where these needs were identified and see what could be done to better serve their English learners. We, of course, began with thinking they need to connect with adult education providers. They need to build in that support for English learners that's going to allow them to improve their English skills while they're gaining the technical skills they need to work in the finishing trades. So we're going to share some examples of how that came about. This is kind of the basic situation that we were confronted with. So several of these sites told us they were engaging limited English speakers, but even if they were able to get them into their apprenticeship, sometimes they would say, well, sit next to your friend who can translate, or they would offer the safety training in Spanish, but they were finding that people were struggling. They weren't always sticking with it. They weren't always grasping the content much as they wanted to. And then when they went out into the job, the contractors were concerned primarily about safety. These can be highly dangerous jobs, glazing, industrial painting. There are real risks involved. And so the union, as well as contractors, were concerned that English language ability was key to success. So the first two sites we worked with, and we're now working with about 4 or 5 others, had identified English language ability as their key needs. This was in Nashville and in Houston. There was a lot of hiring, so they knew they could place people in jobs. The people who were approaching the union were primarily Spanish speakers, and were recognizing that English would be needed on the job. Both of these had a bilingual instructor, but we're recognizing that wasn't enough. They wanted their apprentices to learn English. So we started exploring, we shared the toolkit with them, started talking with them about, because they were not familiar with a lot of the resource links here, or even the concepts of integrating English language instruction. So we started exploring with them what some of these possible solutions could be to the barrier of limited English ability. And what we came up with was that by connecting with them with their public education providers in their communities and with public workforce development resources, Workforce Innovation and Investment Act, we could find resources for them to build these supports, build this education into their programs at no cost to the apprenticeship program, which of course was beautiful to them. They didn't necessarily have a budget set aside to address English language training. It wasn't really their line of business. And when we shared with them the idea of integrated education and training and being able to build in the English language support into their programs, they were very excited about that. The International Finishing Trades Institute, which runs their apprenticeship programs, had actually invested years ago in a vocational ESL curriculum that they had never really been able to implement. So they were able to put this forward and say, look, if we can find adult education providers in our communities, here's a resource we can share with them. Maybe they can make use of this curriculum that we've been unable to use ourselves. So we were able to sort of reach out, find out where the adult education resources were in their communities and make these connections. We had initial calls with the adult ed providers who said, fantastic, that sounds like just the kind of partnership we look for. Interestingly, in Houston and in Nashville, the nonprofit providers of adult education were also deeply woven in with their workforce development system. So it was very easy for them to talk about how to use the range of their WIOA dollars and other public resources to bring adult education, bring ESL instruction to a workforce development context. They really saw the win-win in this, in partnering with an apprenticeship program that essentially embodied an employer relationship, multiple employer relationships in the contractors that were part of this apprenticeship, and also the union, which was providing a lot of support to apprentices as they went through the programs. So it really was seen as a win-win. And what's ended up evolving is free English classes being offered on site at the Finishing Trades Institute training centers where apprenticeships take place. The instruction, and this is still being designed, just getting off the ground now, but the instruction will be contextualized for the finishing trades, really preparing people for success in the apprenticeships, and in some cases integrated with the actual apprenticeship classes. And with that close co-teaching partnership between the English teacher and the Finishing Trades Institute instructor. So the excitement about this is that the apprenticeship programs will now be able to confidently enroll workers who have limited English, who previously they had to turn away or admit and just cross their fingers that they would make it through with the help of friends. The adult education partners are very pleased that this can help their recruitment, enroll more students in their classes. And for those students who are already in their classes, there are now opportunities for them to learn about this apprenticeship program. So it's a kind of cross-referral relationship. It's clear that there's going to be a better chance of retaining students who have interest in the union and in these jobs and in the apprenticeship. There's a lot of support around those students, around the English language learning, but also around just the work that the union does to support them as new apprentices. And the graduates who come out of this apprenticeship program, which is an in-depth 4-year apprenticeship, they'll be working during all that time, earning income, and they'll also graduate with both the important finishing skills, trade skills, as well as the English language skills that they need. And very importantly for our education partners, these students will all demonstrate measurable skills gains, certifications. Their entry into an apprenticeship is employment, and wage increases are structured into the apprenticeship. So something that we share with our apprenticeship partners who don't really understand Workforce Investment Act federal funding and things is that a single certificate program or a vocational training program that includes these sort of industry recognized credentials can really translate into exactly the kind of student outcomes that we need to see for our adult education programs.
Just on that note, I want to just add both again to underline the thing about measurable skill gains. We didn't actually know that starting out, how much, measurable skill gains in the adult ed world is like advancing a level in CASAS or maybe getting a job, but absolutely almost everything related to apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship program can be counted under WIOA as a measurable skill gain. And I just want to make one more plug, and then we're going to get to our questions and discussion, is what we're also finding with this big topic here about adult education and apprenticeship is that probably many of you are involved in writing grant proposals to your state or federal funders. And I think you probably know that any grant program, any grant you submit to the Department of Labor, to your state workforce system, to fund something like what we're talking about here, it asks you very specifically, how are you going to address the needs of underserved populations? Well, guess what? We tell people all the time, like unions, community colleges, other people, if you really want to score high points on that grant application on that topic, call your adult school, because adult schools are, in fact, as you well know, serving exactly those underserved populations that they're concerned about. And that's all the plug I'm going to make. You are, from just a mercenary level, you are super valuable to these partners on that level. I just have to say that. On that note, let's look at the questions.
Yeah, there are lots of great questions here. And first of all, just some kind of basics about access to the toolkit, to the slides. Those, like we said, will be shared by COABE after the presentation with everyone who's here today. The slides themselves include a link to the toolkit, but we've also posted that link here in the chat. And I believe the recording will also be shared along with that. Someone asked about printing the toolkit. Of course, you can print it. We provide it as an electronic resource in case you want to save a tree, but it can certainly be printed. There was a question about accessing the vessel curriculum that was referenced for the finishing trades. It's not ours. It belongs to the International Finishing Trades Institute, but I would suggest we're going to share our contact information on the next screen, and I would encourage you to contact us. That might be something that we could
Yes.
arrange if that would be helpful for you, especially you may be located in one of the communities where we're trying to make these adult education partnerships with the finishing trade. So feel free to reach out to us if you have questions about that. I'm noting a few questions here, either in the Q&A or the chat. One that relates to the last example I gave about the Finishing Trades Institute, I think, is what was the assumption? Why was the assumption that these individuals needed to learn English? Could these documents not be provided in English, in Spanish? I'm sorry. And this is an interesting one because I think we were contacted after, due to recognition that they had been trying to get by for years by offering, by hiring bilingual instructors, doing a good amount of the training in Spanish. Particularly things like the short-term safety training, OSHA, can be offered in Spanish. There are curriculum resources. But they were finding that what we heard first of all is that people's work opportunities were really limited because a few contractors in the area might be willing to work in Spanish and that might be feasible for them. But many had teams where English was relied upon, and particularly because of the safety concerns we mentioned earlier, many contractors were not comfortable hiring someone without ability to communicate on the job in English. So I think that was the primary reason that we were contacted. And as we talked to the staff at each of these sites, the people doing the organizing on the street, as well as those running the training programs, there was kind of a general agreement that people wanted to have English as a part of their skill set to get ahead in their careers and their lives. So it was in response to that.
I would just add to that answer that what we're also finding out, and we didn't go fishing for this, but this emerged from our work with these training programs, is that there's an overall interest on providing English just as improving the lives of their members so that they can go to their parent-teacher conference at school and be able to actually talk with the teacher. And in fact, in one locality in Kansas City, they're talking now about inviting family members to these classes. So this is something that's just emerging from this work that I think just shows the level of interest out there.
There's another question here. Valerie asks, in what other ways can a CBO prepare participants for an apprenticeship career pathway without creating a DOL approved pre-apprenticeship? I don't know if you have thoughts on that, Peter.
I do. That example I gave you about the bus operator, pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship, there is a very robust community-based group serving Spanish-speaking immigrants, Spanish-speaking people who live in that region, called Canal Alliance. And not only are they helping with recruiting, but remarkably, they have now signed on to providing sort of trusted and language-based support for the apprentices after they get hired for the entire length of the apprenticeship, so that they're yet another buttressing support as part of that partnership. I just want to give that example. Jennie, you probably have others.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good answer. I feel like this presentation really emphasized pre-apprenticeship and creating those. We looked at a tool on pre-apprenticeship. We gave some examples, but I think we're equally interested in if thinking about the whole framework and the need to address equity throughout. It's not enough to just do a pre-apprenticeship, and not all apprenticeship programs need a pre-apprenticeship,
Right.
or should focus on that. I think often the emphasis should be on just getting people into an existing apprenticeship program with the support they need, because that
And
way they're
make
already
money.
employed. They're already
Yes.
going through the wage progression. Sometimes a pre-apprenticeship has to be unpaid and can kind of be an extra step on that pathway. So we encourage CBOs as well as adult ed providers to kind of be part of the conversations about supporting people in learning about apprenticeships and then getting the support they need while they're in apprenticeship. Sometimes there are entry requirements that means someone needs to sort of meet certain prerequisites before they can enter, and English language or basic skills, GED, can be some of those requirements, but those aren't always there. Also, we believe that sometimes it's worth advocating for those to be removed. And maybe one way to advocate for an apprenticeship program to adjust its prerequisites and entry requirements is to show that there are CBOs in the community who can support someone through that. So you as a CBO could be an important partner in being part of that conversation to say, why don't we adjust this? Let someone in who might not meet those previous requirements, but ensure that they have the support they need while they go through.
I see a question here,
Yeah.
Jenny. There was a question. Do people in apprenticeship programs need to be able to read English or just speak it? And I'll just say, simple answer to that is they need to be able to read it as well. I can say that as a carpenter, that if you're looking at you, it's not enough to be able to take directions, but you need to be able to read blueprints and read instructions that are often very technical. And it may be that you could get to a certain level just speaking, but you're never going to advance in your career if you can't read English. Jenny, you were going to address another question?
No, I think that's good. I'm just looking through. Anya in San Francisco. Hello, Anya. What tools and resources exist to support underdocumented young adults, transition age youth, in gaining access to a pre-apprenticeship, apprenticeship, and ultimately employment? This is an interesting one, Anya, and Peter and I have been part of some national conversation really exploring, is apprenticeship a pathway that could be expanded and made more accessible to underdocumented, whether young adults or adults. And it's a tricky one for a variety of reasons. I mean, apprenticeship is essentially a form of employment because an apprentice is employed by an employer from the time they enter the apprenticeship. And so a lot depends on those employment relationships. And there is a kind of national effort to explore this deeply explore what is employment and what is not, and what are the definitions here and the legal ramifications, and to explore whether there are models that could be adapted that would be accessible to someone regardless of their work authorization. But I would say that those are conversations and advocacy efforts that are in process. And for now, I think most apprenticeships, if you were to approach them, would say that they weren't in a position, or the employers were not prepared to hire someone without work authorization. What would you add to that, Peter?
I think I think that you covered it quite well. It's obviously, when you're working with immigrant communities, a question and an issue that kind of hits you in the face, and we don't have an easy answer for that. I will say, sort of not directly related to the apprenticeship question, one thing that we've seen in both community colleges and adult schools in relation to things like the trades is also teaching entrepreneurship skills for people to start their own businesses if they're undocumented. Because I don't know about elsewhere, but in California, interestingly, if you're undocumented, you can possibly still get a license to be a contractor. So there's a lot of options out there, maybe not an apprenticeship, because as far as I know, all particularly unionized apprenticeship workplaces, you have to demonstrate a right to work. Simply no quibble. There's no wiggle room there. Just looking at the other questions here. We just have a minute here.
Yeah, I see Dave asking, how many weeks or months would a pre-apprenticeship program typically be? I heard 4 years for the apprenticeship. And that really varies. There are not as many kind of standards or regulations around pre-apprenticeship programs, and they can vary quite a bit depending on what the identified needs are and what needs to be covered during that time. I don't know how else to answer that one, Peter. Do you have a thought?
No, I think that's it. We just
Typically
have
a
a
few
minute.
weeks, right?
Yeah, we're dealing with ones that range from 5 to 12 weeks long. Again, as the issue came up a little earlier, most pre-apprenticeship programs, with a couple exceptions that we know of, do not pay people to be involved. So they have to be either working or not have an income during that time. So you don't want to have it go on for a long period of time, which is just to connect with the point I wanted to make before we closed, is there are a growing number of examples we're encountering where pre-apprenticeship programs are connected to the workforce system because they have a great deal of resources in terms of Title I resources. For example, if you can get your pre-apprenticeship program on what's called the eligible training provider list, it allows you to then use individual training account dollars and pay for individuals or even a cohort of people to take a pre-apprenticeship class. For those of you who are from the workforce world or connected to your local workforce, we'd be glad to talk to you more about that, and please contact us with any questions. We're very excited about this prospect.
Well, I see a few other questions, and we might have time for one more. I'm afraid we're not going to get through them all. It's great to see people's interest and enthusiasm, and like Peter mentioned, you should feel free to reach out to us at these email addresses. We really love talking about this topic and sharing resources, so we'd be happy to connect. Did you see one, Peter, that looked like a great additional one to address?
Nothing's jumping at me. There's a very long comment from Susan from New Jersey. I think just noting that this topic of IET funding is coming up in terms of pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship in the Office of Apprenticeship in New Jersey. So that's encouraging. And just pointing out that this whole stuff that we're talking about is essential to this work.
I saw one other question in here about from Christy about for a county office of education looking to start a pre-apprenticeship, what would be our first steps? And I think one of the main areas we try to emphasize through the toolkit is that it really is about partnership. And I think finding who are those partners in the area. If you're looking at pre-apprenticeship, you certainly need to know who are the partners who are already providing apprenticeships, because you don't want to design a pre-apprenticeship without its connection to apprenticeship. And of course, when talking about apprenticeship, you need to be in close collaboration with employers. And if it's a unionized occupation, with the labor partners as well. So finding out where are these collaborations coming together in your community. And what Peter and I always emphasize, and maybe this is a closing point, is that adult education needs to be at the table. So if you haven't been invited in, step up and let it be known the ways that you can make a difference. And I think with that, we need to hand it back to our COABE host, James.
Yes,
and I see he's sharing a poll with you right now.
We'd love to hear from you. Contact us, please. Thank you.
Peter, Jennie, that was an awesome presentation. Thank you so much. Crash the party. I like that.
Go for it. Be bold.
Yes. I think Robert's still on. Robert, you want to say a couple closing words before we log off?
That's it. I'm totally adopting that. Adult ed needs to crash the party. Thank you to Peter. Thank you to Jennie. That was fantastic. At COABE, you walk away. What can I do now after a session? And I know what to do when I get back to my program. And if I were still administering a program, I'd know what to do. That was wonderful. The toolkit looks fantastic. And at Burlington English, we're here to help in any way to help you support, particularly your ESL learners. Fantastic presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Robert. And thank you, Burlington English, again, for sponsoring today's webinar. We appreciate it. We're grateful. Peter, Jennie, thank you again so much for a wonderful presentation. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope everybody has a great rest of the week and a great weekend. As just another reminder, I heard them mention this, but a replay of this webinar will be posted to coabe.org along with the materials that they shared today. And with that, I will sign off. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, James. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
That was great.